Welcome to Preparing for AI with Matt Cartwright and Jimmy Rhodes, the podcast which investigates the effect of AI on jobs, one industry at a time. We dig deep into barriers to change, the coming backlash, and ideas for solutions and actions that individuals and groups can take. We're making it our mission to help you prepare for the human and social impacts of AI.
Welcome back to the Preparing for AI podcast. Bit of a switcheroony this week. This is Jimmy introducing the podcast. This week we're going to be talking about law and the potential impact on the law industry. I'm going to hand over to Matt to do a bit of a brief introduction into sort of the kinds of roles that will be impacted in the sector.
So I'm going to start off this week with a quote from Brookings.edu from an article titled "How AI Will Revolutionize the Practice of Law." So here's the quote. So even with widespread adoption of AI, attorneys will still be vitally important. AI can't make a convincing presentation to a jury. The technology can't fully weigh the factors that go into many strategic decisions, large and small, that get made over the course of any litigation matter. It can't replace the human element of relationships with clients, and a computer can't play a leadership role in motivating a team of attorneys to produce their best work. In short, it would be a mistake to use the extraordinary advances of AI to minimize the importance of human element in the practice of law, but it would be just as big a mistake to dismiss the role of AI, which will fundamentally reshape the landscape for both providers and users of law services. So we start this week, and unusually for me, with something reassuring, a bit of copium if you like. But of course, any law firm that fails to capitalize on the power of AI will be unable to remain cost competitive because they're likely to lose clients and undermine their ability to attract and retain talent. And I want to give a quote from a Goldman Sachs report in 2023, which estimated that generative AI could automate up to 44% of legal tasks. Now, that's not legal roles, that's about tasks, but that suggests a huge impact on this sector. And automation could extend beyond, purely admin tasks and affect a broad range of legal work. So we thought this was a really great industry to look at because it's somewhere that AI is really going to need people's skills to complement it at the moment. So, there is that augmentation that we kind of hear being talked about, but it's also a great example of where some roles will be far more impacted than others. So, perhaps if you're a judge or a senior solicitor or a partner, you might not be impacted in terms of your job. In fact, you may well find that the impact is, massively positive in terms of the use of your time, the way that you're able to, automate the tasks that previously would have taken a long time. You're able to make them much quicker. But if you're a junior, a paralegal, or, in certain secretarial roles, the potential impact here is absolutely huge. So this is a sector where we think it's not spread evenly. It could be a real productivity gain for some people, but for others, this is really going to be somewhere that we are going to see roles, we think, start to be lost pretty quickly. So, Jimmy, do you have anything in terms of specifics to law or just developments from the last week or so that you think we should let our listeners know?
I don't think there's anything been specific to law in the last week, but in terms of what I've been doing, I've binned off my ChatGPT subscription and decided to subscribe to Claude instead because I seem to be having much more genuine conversations with it. So Claude 3, if anyone doesn't know, is the latest model from Anthropic. Claude 3 Opus is the paid model, which I think it costs about $20 a month, which they all do right now. And I've subscribed to that because I find it much more genuine. It's willing to answer more questions. It's willing to be sort of open with more conversations, whereas ChatGPT seems to have more guardrails in place. So I'm having quite a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, I've not used Claude yet because I ended up paying for Gemini and ChatGPT, but I'm going to drop Gemini. So maybe I'll pick up Claude.
Yeah, like I say, I'm kind of chopping and changing at the moment, and maybe when GPT-5 comes out, I'll jump ship again. But let's see. In terms of the specifics around law, though, I think there's already tools that impact in the law industry. So I've got a couple of examples of tools here, such as Ross Intelligence and Case Text, which they're used to sort of quickly scan through legal databases and very quickly do things like discovery and match up to previous case law. So there are a bunch of tools, and I'm not sure AI is the right term for these kind of tools, but what the domain that we're talking about in the future in terms of what's going to affect law is clearly large language models. And Claude is worth a mention there because it has a huge context window. So you could potentially feed all of your discovery into it, like all of your case into it.
Of course, don't put all your documents into the public model, though.
Well, no.
Maybe get an enterprise model before you do it.
Of course, yeah. There's enterprise versions that you can use, so you're not exposing yourself or your clients. But yes, there's already models out there that have huge context windows now. So you could potentially feed all of the text, all the discovery text into it, and actually get that summarized very quickly, find relevant pieces of case law very quickly, that kind of thing.
I mean, I looked at similar Case Text's co-counsel, which is the one you mentioned. That was one of the main sort of tools that I came across. And another one was called Westlaw Precision with generative AI by Thomson Reuters, which is another integrative sort of generative AI tool to enhance legal research. So this is one where users input questions in natural language and receive responses with links to kind of sources, which is more based around, legal research, makes that much more efficient and accurate. So, I guess in terms of jobs, we can see quite clearly who that would affect. And you talked about the sort of integration with LLMs. I mean, when I looked at this, the main thing that came out was actually ChatGPT, but not being used as a standalone. But in terms of how it was being integrated with, legal tech tools, the key finding that certainly we've made when we've researched this is that there are tools out there, there are more being developed, and that they all seem to be, or all the kind of useful stuff is based on integrating a large language model or creating, a more specific. And this is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago in terms of how you make it more focused. The more focused you make your prompting, the better the response you're going to get. So, really good examples that are already out there. I think there are probably a lot more, but these seem to be the two main ones. So co-counsel kind of seems to come up everywhere when you research this. Yeah,
these models definitely need fine tuning for specific, especially for law. Like it's very specific. It depends on which country you're in. Like there's a absolute ton of dependencies, but clearly there's applications for large language models. I mean, just to give a slightly, this is an example that maybe people have heard of, but there was a slightly comical example involving GPT last year where we spoke about hallucinations on previous episodes. So there was an example where a legal team actually used ChatGPT and it made up 6 fictitious case citations. So last June, I can't believe they weren't just sacked on the spot, but the law firm Leverdow and Oberman were ordered to pay a $5,000 fine because basically they used ChatGPT to write their notes for them, to write their brief for them, and it just made up 6 pieces of case law that didn't exist. So there's maybe a ways to go yet.
You mentioned actually in one of our early episodes about discovery, and obviously, for a lot of people in this sector, that is one of the most time-consuming tasks in sort of litigation, could take weeks and months to do. And one of the examples that comes out is how LLMs can literally do that in minutes or even seconds. But I wonder if, I think like some examples we've given before, it's probably still a case of you need an expert to put in the parameters and the prompts at the beginning. You need someone to apply the finishing touches at the end. We're not yet at a point, and maybe some of these specific tools are, but where, discovery could be completely completed. So I think at the moment we're still, like in many other sectors, we're making efficiency gains. We're taking out, big kind of chunks of administrative work, but there would still be an area where we need someone to polish and tweak the kind of final submissions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure that'll ever change to an extent because a large language model is just trained on everything, and so if you're specific with what you ask of it, like we mentioned this before on a previous podcast, but I've seen people I've seen people or spoken to people who've had a go with ChatGPT and been really unimpressed by it. And you see examples of this on the internet, and quite often what they've done is they've given a really, really vague prompt, and so it gives a really, really vague answer because, that's the same as any human would do. Like it's garbage in, garbage out is what I'm trying to say. So I think that will always be the case. You either need a fine-tuned model, or you need to give really good prompts, or you need to give a really good description of what you're looking for.
Maybe in the short term then, sort of prompt engineering and being able to know how to manipulate and work with a large language model is probably something that's still very useful in this area, because we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but giving a sort of personality, so telling the large language model you are a legal researcher, and giving them that information allows them to think in a certain way and to look at information in a certain way. So maybe, and I may be jumping ahead in terms of the podcast here, but maybe that's still something that if we've got people in the sector who are worried and thinking, what can I do, is learn how to prompt.
Oh, massively. I think, we say this in a lot of our episodes, but I think one of the things that anyone can do right now, if they haven't already, is actually have a go with some of these tools and try them out, basically. And exactly that, like learn how to prompt them, learn how to talk to them. I mean, it is just like talking to a person, but I guess it feels a bit weird at first because you're speaking to a computer or a machine. But effectively, that's how it works. So
I think we say try them out, and I'm conscious that we say this a lot as a piece of advice, is just go and try things out, and it is not particularly helpful. Go and try it out, go and do what? That's where I think learning how to prompt, and you've given references to their own website, so OpenAI, Claude as well. I'm pretty sure Anthropic had some information. There's I did a course from on Coursera from Vanderbilt, which is a prompt engineering course, which takes a bit longer, but all of that stuff, it's not difficult to learn how to prompt, but it makes things much, much easier, because as you start to understand how the model works, and you start to understand that you can either give it a load of information, or you can give it a small amount of really key information, like telling it to take on a persona, or like defining the way in which you want it to quote your information back, or even asking it to tell me a better way to give you this prompt. I mean, that's a really useful thing, is asking a simple question and saying, I want to ask you this question, tell me a better way to ask this question. And the large language model can help you learn how to prompt it.
Exactly. I mean, as you've been talking, I've just typed that very thing into Claude. So I've just typed in, how do you prompt an AI, and give me some bullet points. And that's exactly what it says. It says, be clear and specific, provide necessary context and background information, break it into smaller manageable steps, use simple, concise language, provide examples or to illustrate your expectations, set specific parameters, and it goes on. I mean, the first thing I would recommend doing is, if you haven't ever used a large language model before, ever, go to ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, there's loads of them available, and ask it how to talk to it, because it will tell you. And I think you'll be pretty amazed by the results.
Sort of in line with the singularity we talked about, where eventually you don't need to train, because we end up being trained by the AI to tell the AI what to do. And then at what point are we really telling it now, or is the AI telling us what to tell it?
Yeah, there's already been discussion around this. It's kind of, policymakers are potentially using AI to write policy, and then they're sending a massive policy document, and then on the other end, someone's saying, okay, can you summarize this into bullet points for me? And it gets summarized back into bullet points. It's kind of the way of the world already, and it's definitely the way the world's going to be in the future.
I had another really good example, and I'm not sure, I don't have a specific tool that could do this, but another example that I found of how sort of AI could be used in legal sector is during a trial, using it to analyze the trial transcript in real time, and then provide input to sort of attorneys so they can, help choose questions in real time to ask witnesses. I thought that was a really interesting use. I mean, I guess that will depend on how regulation works and what you're able to do. I'm not sure how people in the sector would feel about it. Maybe for some people it's a great boost. Maybe for others this would be a big concern.
Yeah, what are we talking about here? We're talking about an attorney with an earpiece in with ChatGPT talking.
That's
in his
how
ear.
I see it. Yeah.
Well, their ear, basically. Yeah, that's. I mean,
and then they've both got an AI, and I guess it depends on whether your solicitor's got a better AI than the other person.
Yeah, or better at prompting. I don't know. I mean, at that point, you're not using a robot as an attorney, but like effectively, you've got a person who's parroting a machine.
One other way that I think there's a sort of positive in here, and it doesn't necessarily apply to people in the sector so much as members of the public, but positive aspect for citizens is, one of the issues with law is, and if you take somewhere like the US, for example, it costs an insane amount of money to use a lawyer for, 1 hour, let alone for a whole case. Again, from this brookings.edu website, I saw an example about AI making it much less costly for people to initiate and pursue litigation. So the example it gave was how it was now already possible with one click to automatically generate a 1,000-word lawsuit against robocallers. So that seems like, to me, a really good thing is that, empowering people, you think of small claims courts and things like that, to be able to bring cases, people who otherwise would not be able to do that. We know that things like legal aid have been cut across the world in the last few years. Empowering people to be able to use the law seems like a positive aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's definitely loads of positive aspects to LLMs and AI, and that's one of them. I was actually thinking of one myself. Maybe I shouldn't give it away, but along similar lines, like taking people to small claims court, for example, is quite effective in parts of the world. And I'm pretty sure AI, you could, if you wanted to take someone to small claims court, you could just use AI to knock out your claim. And
we'll probably make the decision on those kind of small claims.
Yeah, in the future, absolutely.
So we're going to do this week. We're doing a slightly different format. So this will be the first week actually that we have a guest on the podcast. So in the second part today, we're going to be talking with somebody who works in the law sector, and to kind of get their views on what they're seeing, the things that they're worried about, and the kind of changes that they're seeing take shape. So maybe that is a time that we'll kind of ask some questions around that and how they think it might impact the ability of those kind of small. Because the way I can see it is it helps you bring those small claims, but it probably also makes those decisions, maybe with a judge rubber stamping it, because some of those simpler to make decisions, that's kind of where this is probably headed, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously it's great that we're going to get a guest on this week, and it'll be really interesting to hear from sort of an expert in the field. One of the things that we obviously talk about each week is the backlash potentially and what people can do to prepare. So I can kick that off, but we can talk about that a little bit. So I think same as previous weeks, obviously the backlash potentially is going to be, this could lead to significant job losses. And you've got people going through university right now who are studying law. And so what should they do? You've got this just around the corner. Are the junior positions actually going to be available anymore? Are your paralegal kind of positions actually going to be available in the future? So, in terms of preparation for that, I think law feels like a field where there's always going to be a human element. There's always going to be a human in the loop. As we talked about earlier on, you're probably not going to have a robot at trial. You're going to have a human, even if they're assisted by AI. So I think it's about familiarizing yourself with these tools early, as we talked about before. I think it's like, developing potentially specialized skills, looking at specialist areas that require human judgment, creativity, complex negotiations, trial advocacy, that kind of thing, because that's where there's going to be a future in the industry. Also, anything that involves client relationships, which a lot of law does, it's anything that requires empathy, it's always going to have a human in the loop. So I think those are some of the things you can kind of think about focusing on. I also think that actually, in terms of the backlash in a legal perspective, there's probably going to be quite a lot in law because, ultimately it's a relatively slow moving system. How are you going to have who's going to be responsible if AIs are making decisions. So I think there's probably going to be quite a lot of regulatory challenges, which might slow some of this down. So I'm not sure that the impact is a short-term thing. It's probably more in the medium term.
And when we talk about backlash, there's also there are really two sort of sides of backlash, aren't there? I mean, there's the backlash from the people within that industry who don't want to lose their jobs. There's also the backlash from society, and whether or not you're willing to accept a robot or an AI who may actually be better and fairer at making a decision, but we know that there are biases in there at the moment. I mean, there are biases in people, right? But we know there are biases in the system. It does feel like I'm not sure whether society or governments, maybe some societies won't have a choice, but certainly where you're able to vote in a government, whether you would be willing to accept that level. And that's where it comes back to this idea of, if it's a small claim, if it's helping you to write something, if it's researching, there's a difference between that and going into a court and then not being a judge, sat at the table at the top. There's just a computer. It feels like that the backlash is, like I say, the backlash is not just about people working there. The backlash is about what people will accept.
Yeah, I actually think with that, I think that's a step too far, and I think we're really far away from that.
What's far away? Because in far away is 5 years, 10 years.
My view is, in terms of judges and law, I think, and I could be completely wrong, but as much as I'm an advocate for AI, I think that there'll always be a human in the loop, because for all our biases, you can see our biases. Our biases are on the surface, and so they're known biases. I feel like with AI, unless something changes, you don't actually know what the biases of AI are. It's really hard to figure out. They're like a black box. I think it has been demonstrated that ChatGPT is kind of left-leaning because it's been pushed in that direction. And I think in a world where you're training AIs on everything that's on the internet, and you don't actually know what its leaning is, unless that changes, I don't see this happening. I don't see you having AI judges or, AIs making decisions on these kind of cases. Maybe on really basic stuff where it's just, parking ticket type stuff.
Yeah.
But
did they do it? Yes, no. And it's a binary.
Yeah.
You can just look at a piece of information, or they can look at a camera and see it happening. Yeah. There's I think it's a really great essay, which was written actually in, May of last year for a competition. But there was an essay written by someone called Jeffrey Miller. I know nothing about this person. It was on a website called greaterwrong.com, which is, a lot of the stuff on there is about AI, and it tends to take quite a doomer view and talk about alignment and stuff. It's a really interesting website. But the article was titled "A Moral Backlash Against AI Will Probably Slow Down AGI Development." And I thought it was really interesting because one of the key points that he writes about is that once industries like law, where people are highly educated, politically engaged, prone to adapting new kind of moral stigmas on social media, and are pretty well paid and have assets and can maybe afford to take some time off to fight against and rally against AI development, that this is where an anti-AI movement is likely to start, rather than, for example, factory jobs being removed. Because although these are kind of not unionized, and he's talking here about non-violent protest and backlash, so kind of cultural, social, political, economical movement. I thought this was really interesting because you kind of think of a backlash as being a big, a sort of protest or unions, but actually these are industries where, and okay, we've said the people at the very top won't be the ones losing their jobs, but these are people who are politically engaged. These are the people who, it's a lot of people from law who go into politics or work in local politics or are involved in that. When they start to see their industry affected, is this where some of that, like I say, a more measured, a more kind of planned backlash could come from, because they have the power to be able to influence.
Yeah, and regulate as well. I mean, the law profession is obviously going to be involved with some of the regulations around AI and some of the cases that are bound to happen in the future. We've already got examples of cases around copyright and around trademarking, that kind of thing, that are already going through the courts with AI. So absolutely, I think this is potentially one of the areas where it starts to get more exposure.
And you talked in the first section about hallucinations. and it's something that comes up when you look through some of the kind of industry-based articles and websites. So there's one called LexisNexis. I am not from the law sector, so I don't know if this is a reputable source or not. They seem to be a US based law journal. And there's an article talking about the implementation of AI, and it talks a lot about the risks of machine hallucination, which I guess not just risks in terms of cases, but in terms of, a big kind of case where there was a hallucination would risk the integrity of your firm or the integrity of the whole concept of using AI. So, it is going to need these specialized AI tools which are tailored to legal applications. And, I guess the more obscure the topic. So in this in this text, the example was Connecticut's land use statutes. They use an example where ChatGPT was hallucinating because, the information in there was obscure. So it's not just about it kind of being a wide, broad question around hallucinations, but also asking about a kind of obscure concept where maybe there's not that much information out there. Maybe ChatGPT or Gemini or whichever has not been trained particularly well on Connecticut's land use statute. So it starts to hallucinate because it doesn't know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that information's even online in some cases. Most stuff is online nowadays, but there must be archives of law information that's in libraries, like archives of cases and case law. But to talk about hallucinations a little bit more, like I don't know if that's something that's going to get ironed out of the system with these large language models. I feel like, given what they're designed to do, which is, they can provide fiction or fact, they can do both, then I don't think it will. It feels like it's kind of built into the system that it's got the freedom to be creative, and therefore pinning it down to say, it's always got to be fact-based is difficult. Some of the newer models, so Gemini is actually a good example, although I don't use it and don't like it very much. One of the things it does do is quite often provide sources and provides links to sources. So in terms of what we were talking about earlier on, which models to use, they do all have pros and cons. And I think one of Gemini's pros at the moment, from what I've seen, is that it provides links to its information.
Isn't it more likely, coming back to the kind of singularity concept, as we see more kind of the vicious kind of circle of AI feeding information in, does that not potentially mean we see more and more hallucinations? Because actually, every time an AI hallucinates, does that data not then go into the training data?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really weird with these LLMs is, like, if they do hallucinate, quite often you can just say to it, "Are you sure that's correct?" And it'll correct itself. It'll realize that it's made a mistake, or it's actually just giving you some duff information, basically. So it's kind of a weird feature of them, is that sometimes they just give out information, and then when you feed it back to them and say, "Is this correct?" they'll be like, "No." In terms of, to be honest, it's beyond my area of expertise. In terms of, so to elaborate on what you're talking about, the next generation of large language models, the first generation, effectively, they were trained on all the information that was out there, like everything on the internet, like videos as well, speech, like all sources of information you could think of that were freely available, effectively, on the internet.
And we should add, there is other stuff that wasn't on the internet. So there was also stuff that either publicly available or that they were able to get hold of. So I don't know quite how it works, but books, journals, for example, that were not on the internet, I'm not sure how that worked. I guess stored on kind of maybe intranets somewhere. I presume It was digital copies. I presume they were not scanning in physical books, but I know there is also other information, isn't there, apart from the internet? So it's broader than that.
It's broader than that. I mean, I guess the way to think about it is they scanned in as much information as they could find, basically everything they could get their hands on. They've pretty much exhausted that with the first generation, and so the training was done in two parts. So they trained it on all that information, and then what they would do is they actually had a team of workers who basically were, their job was to put prompts into the original version of ChatGPT, in this case that I'm talking about. Their original job was to prompt it and then rate the answers, rate the responses that came out, and so that was done by humans in the first instance. What you're talking about there is the next generation of language models, where they're generating the prompting, the last bit that I talked around, the sort of refining of the model so that it's ethically sound and all this kind of stuff, and has the right, they call it alignment, so has the right alignment with what we want out, what the, in this case, what OpenAI want out of the model, so the kinds of responses they want it to give. So for example, I mean, a really simple example is if you ask it unethical questions, if you ask it, how to murder somebody, how to make a bomb, this kind of thing, it won't give you the answer. That's alignment. So, if you just train a large language model on everything and don't do any alignment, then it can be potentially quite dangerous and quite unethical. So, but that alignment part is now being done by AIs. And what you were talking about with the training data. So one, the alignment's been done by AIs for the next generation of models, but also they're generating fake data. So they're generating more data to train the models on, using large language models to generate that data. And I'm kind of unclear on how that works, but apparently it does improve the models and make better models. So that we're in that, in terms of the singularity you were talking about, we're in that kind of like feedback loop now, that self-reinforcing loop. It's at the limit of my understanding. The bit I don't understand is why that works. So maybe someone can let me know in the comments.
Before we go on to our interview, should we just have a chat about what people can do in this sector? So, I guess like many of the podcasts that we've done so far, it's probably initially about learning to use tools and specifically the ones which are targeted at law. So, making sure that you understand where there are specific tools, learning to prompt, we said earlier. Maybe even get on ChatGPT. If you've got the premium one, you can design your own ChatGPTs that are specific. So you could design one that, does what you want it to do, and then you can share it with other people in the sector, or not, if you prefer not to. But it feels to me this is a sector where, for a lot of roles, the die's already kind of set. And I wonder if you are a solicitor with a partner in a practice, what you need to be doing is looking at these tools and thinking how you can ensure your business is not going to be uncompetitive because you are more expensive than everybody else. But if you're in those admin roles, is it about reskilling and learning how to use AI, or is it actually thinking about what you can do, and depending on your age and how long you need to work for, about what you want to do next?
Yeah, I think if you're already in the profession, then actually you've got a bit of a leg up on all this. I would worry more about people who are going into the profession, because I think those jobs, those paralegal jobs, those more kind of like administrative, for want of a better word. I mean, they're still skilled jobs, but the jobs that we're talking about that can be replaced by AI, those, after this generation, once these tools really kick in, they're going to be much harder to come by. So as we said before, I think it's around focusing on the human-to-human interaction, which there's always going to be a part for that in law. There's always going to be roles there in law in that sense. And I think people who are already in the profession are probably already picking up some of those skills, so can just look to sort of accelerate that or continue to do that.
When I asked ChatGPT to be a recruitment expert in the law sector and advise clients when to look at alternative employment, it said, for those in document review and legal research, they should look sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, make of that what you will. I take sooner rather than later as, ChatGPT tends to be, in terms of its answers, it tends to be polite in the way that it puts it. So I would take sooner rather than later as, in ChatGPT's opinion, you need to look at alternative routes. But it did suggest some new opportunities. So it talked about cybersecurity and privacy law. And I guess there will be, specific elements of law that are particularly influenced by AI. So privacy is one. I think there must be others which I can't think of at the moment. And it then talked about ensuring you have financial stability for career pivots. One possible bright spot that I could see, that's the regulation of AI itself, which you probably, if you're listening, start to understand this is something I'm kind of really keen on. and it's an area that obviously regulation is going to need legal expertise. You can have people like me that are interested in getting involved in it and maybe understand policy, but it's going to require, I think, a lot of people from the law sector to help deal with this regulation, because, they are going to have to not only help create the regulation, but the regulation is going to have to be legally sound. So I think there are opportunities there. I don't think we can rely on, AI to regulate itself. So I think this is where you still need people. And maybe here, a call to action from me for people who, in the legal field who care about this to start getting involved in it, because it feels like the people that are needed, there are people that need, we need people who kind of care, who think this is an important thing for humanity. We also need people who have skills in kind of policy writing and regulation, but we also need legal people to enter that field. So maybe there's a kind of bright spot in a new area that's opening up for people.
Yeah, of all the roles, of all the jobs, professions that we've discussed, I think this is one where AI is going to create quite a lot of work, as well as eliminate some parts of the work. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of work generated by AI in the legal profession.
So shall we leave it at that and move on to our interview? So thanks, Jimmy. Keep listening. We'll be back in a few seconds. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of this week's episode of Preparing for AI. And very excited to say we have our first guest. I've got Kelly Inga with me. I'm going to ask her to introduce herself, and then we're going to have a bit more of a deeper dive into how people in the industry are thinking about artificial intelligence. So Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, my name, as you said, is Kelly Inga. I am qualified in 2 jurisdictions. I'm qualified in Spain and England and Wales. I have over 15 years of experience as an in-house commercial lawyer solicitor. And my sector is fintechs, financial technology, car payments specifically. So one of the companies I have worked for is Visa. And I think actually that summarizes very well actually that type of law that I do, which is heavily regulated and also produces a lot of turnover for very big companies.
So do you feel that people working in the sector are really thinking about the impact of AI? And if they do, is it all doom and gloom? Is it all positive? I mean, is there optimism about the impact, or are most people, concerned about how it's going to kind of negatively impact on jobs?
Well, I think there are definitely two sides to this story, as we will let's call it like that. So definitely, actually, there is a positive impact. I actually, one of the companies that I work for, they're just created a legal operations team, 3 people actually, which were going to make processes, parameters to feed the machines or the AI just to produce much better, faster, efficient processes so that the work of the legal professionals was going to be better, much more efficient, etc. So, and this is definitely was a very good starting point. For instance, without saying any names of the apps, but we actually used to use an app for contract management. So what happened? The sales representatives or the sales team actually will start actually inputting client details into a sales opportunity, as they call it. Then starting, for example, getting pricing approval. And then once actually different stakeholders will approve that opportunity, then it will go to legal for creating a template or for actually just input or give approvals according to the policies. But if actually it was a very low risk according to policies once again, then actually that template will be created automatically without actually the need of a lawyer to see it. Now, this is very, very simple for, as I said, low risk, very simple terms. The problem and the complication starts actually when the client becomes more sophisticated. They have their own policies, they have their own regulations that we have to adapt, we have to change. And that's actually where the human factor cannot be lost. So for low risk, as I mentioned, very efficient, faster. But then for higher, much more complicated clients, then actually the human factor definitely needs to be kept.
And I think that's what, the research that Jimmy and I have done, that's kind of where where we found that the sector, and a lot of sectors are at the moment, that, at the moment it really is augmenting people. But that's not necessarily, we talk every episode about the speed of advancement, and it is exponential. And I think sometimes, there's maybe a naivety that because of how things are at the moment, that actually we're years and years away from sort of massive refinements. And your point that you've made was something that we touched on earlier in the episode about how, at the moment, because the parameters have to be set very, very carefully, and because of the risk of things like hallucination, areas like law, no one at the moment is going to sign off on a piece of software or an AI tool to do everything. You're still going to need a person. I think Jimmy said to me after we recorded, one of the reasons it's going to need a person is because there needs to be someone to blame if it goes wrong. Which
someone needs to take the blame.
Exactly, which is a really good point. But doesn't, the things that you talk about, you still need somebody, but actually you only need somebody at the very end to, apply the finishing touches and to sign off on it. You're still taking away if you're taking away a lot of time, at some point that becomes, you end up taking away those jobs. Yeah,
definitely. As we were mentioning before as well, is just a fact actually that double checking needs to be done. I mean, in my work, I have used AI, for example, let's say for inspiration, when actually drafting something was very complicated. So you feed parameters to that software just actually to give you like an example or to give you a clause within those parameters that you're saying. But sometimes it does, sometimes for me, the majority of the times, it didn't reflect what I was looking for. So even though actually I use maybe like a sentence, the rest I still needed to do. Maybe for other cases or for other types of law, it will be better because it has been more tested or more samples have been uploaded, but I don't think actually it's 100%.
But every time you use it, you're contributing to the training as well. So it's the singularity that we've talked about in previous episodes is where, you feed stuff in, but eventually it becomes AIs training AIs. As you train these tools and as you put information in, that information is, a large language model is giving you information. You're also giving it information and training it. So every time you do it, in theory, it should be helping it to get better.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really great example because it is a positive, but we can also look forward and see from a jobs point of view how it does carry risk.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily now, but I think the timeline for these things, maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe people are thinking it's 5 years out. It's probably quicker than that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's the problem, right? That the gloom part, as you mentioned it before, is actually job security. Because one person, or actually in one of the companies I used to work for, the plan, for example, was just to replace the entirety of the commercial lawyers, because actually, according to their perspective, we were just negotiating contracts, and actually a machine can do that. So we can just feed in a playbook saying, well, if the client doesn't accept this clause, A and B can be offered. And it should be done, nothing else. So the plan actually was to replace that negotiation part with a software. And then if it doesn't work according to that playbook, then actually that's the moment when it goes to a commercial contracts lawyer. And obviously, as we were saying, that actually puts at risk job security. But as I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's more about what you want to give your client. If you want to give your client this perspective of, well, actually, is take it or leave it. This is just the approach. These are the 3 different approaches I were taking. There is nothing else. Or if you want to give your client the approach of, well, actually, we're here for you. We're going to give you personal support, customer care, and we are going to be with you from day one until the day you are no longer with us, then that's actually a question for the law firm or for actually the big client who wants to provide these services.
Yeah, and I think that point about having the soft skills and having people at the kind of interface and serving the customer, still having a person who's approachable. If you are a high net worth individual has their own lawyer, or a company that has lawyers, you're still going to want people to deal with at the front, but it's the kind of back end of it, that those soft skills are where even if you ask an AI now, if you ask a large language model, where should people, improve their skills? It tells you improve the soft skills, because that's going to be the important bit.
Yeah.
But I think what you've talked about is an absolutely brilliant example. The kind of contract thing of where you can see an example where I don't know when it will be, but you can see how it's not an entire role, but it's an entire kind of team could potentially be taken out. And then, again, are you likely to see everybody announce we're cutting all our contract lawyers? No, you're not. But maybe you don't replace them over time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really good example.
They definitely can reduce the numbers. Just because of that. But sometimes actually the reduction of lawyers actually happens, but then the workload does not stop. So you're putting more pressure on a very, very small team actually just to produce more contracts, to negotiate, to give that personal support that we were mentioning before. So it's a very tricky situation. I think that, AI definitely is a great help because of what I mentioned, actually, that journey actually that can create. And then afterwards, even actually this archiving system that it produces. And then you can go so easily and find so easy a contract that has been signed or create precedents. Very, very helpful. But then actually, if the plan at some point is to replace this entirely with replace actually that personal touch or the personal, the qualified skills of a lawyer, then I think actually that's where it gets more complicated, and it's not going to be like a complete 100% perfect outcome.
Are you personally using AI tools in your job?
Well,
knowingly?
Knowingly, to be honest, actually, I didn't know until very recently. So as I mentioned before, actually, I used it sometimes actually for this inspiration for drafting when the drafting was very, very complicated. And then I also used another software for getting stakeholders' comments. When you are drafting or you're negotiating a contract, not all of the clauses are going to be legal related. Some of them are going to be compliance. Some of them are going to be risk. In my sector, many of them are going to be credit and risk related because we cannot contract with a risky client. So when gathering that feedback from different stakeholders, if we can approve or we cannot approve certain changes, that's actually when that AI has become very helpful, because you just highlight a clause saying at credit and risk, can you please confirm this is okay? And it was so easy to get that feedback. Now, it was easy for me, but it was not easy for the other stakeholders. Some of them, the software did not work correctly. They couldn't see the letters, or they couldn't see the text very clearly because it was not big enough. So still, as I said, a work in progress, but it was very helpful actually when it came to getting that feedback.
Yes, it's clearly not there yet.
No.
But if you look at the large language models, if you look at the journey, let's just take ChatGPT from kind of 3.5, 4. I think OpenAI have kind of admitted now, they're not particularly impressed with ChatGPT 4, and there are a lot of issues. Even I managed to kind of fool it into doing something, and I've got some basic understanding of prompt engineering, but I've managed to fool it. It's not perfect, but it's probably one or two iterations from being pretty close to perfect. And I think with, particular sectors, once you get the sort of main language model sorted, it's then really easy to apply that, because, even when you're creating kind of particular platforms or apps or small language models, they're still based on the model. So they still require that model to be better. And as it gets better and better, the apps that come out of it in the specific platforms that you get for industries will get better. When we just go back to jobs for a minute, so without getting too personal, I mean, do you have concerns about the impact on, I say job security, your job security, but also people around you? Are you seeing, or do you expect to see the effects happen in the immediate future? What sort of timeline are you expecting, if you've thought this much about it?
I wouldn't say immediate future necessarily, but in the near future, definitely there might be some more difficulties for someone who has no experience to get into the sector. Because right now, in my sector, once again, because it's about commercial and about what has happened before or other companies or what competitors are doing, the experience actually is very valuable. But if someone actually just newly qualified, just came out of university or doing a master's, maybe without any experience, I think it can be very tricky. But some of the solicitors actually do training contracts. So actually those can become very valuable because normally that is the bridge for getting a position at a law firm or at an in-house team. So probably that's the best way. I think also about paralegals and because I actually used to work with 2 wonderful paralegals in my previous company, and they all actually, they were very young people. They never wanted just to stay being a paralegal forever. They wanted to qualify. They wanted to pursue bigger objectives and get actually promoted at some point to being legal counsel, for example. So their road actually was getting those exams while actually working as well. So probably that's a very good combination because then when they want to access to legal counsel positions, then they can show, well, actually, I have actually experience. I know how this works. And once again, prove themselves and be better than the competition. So probably actually the best right now is getting as much experience as possible.
Quickly.
Quickly.
I mean, that's a really, really helpful answer because my next question was actually going to be, and this was something that Jimmy and I thought about at the end of us recording the first part of this episode, which was, most of the people we presume, we're not from the sector, but we presume people who are entering as kind of secretaries and paralegals, they're not saying, well, this is my career, I want to do this forever. They're going to use that experience and complement it and then hopefully move up. And so if those are the positions that are going to go, and I think we can assume fairly confidently that a lot of those positions will go in the short to medium term. Where do people coming into the sector, where do they get that experience? And I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but someone who is about to graduate from university or someone who's thinking of studying law, do you have any advice for them on how they kind of mitigate that and how they make sure that they are still able to get the experience they need?
Well, definitely, as I said, the training contract is a very good route to get that experience that we were mentioning. We said actually that paralegals want to move up, but that up to now, that doesn't mean actually that companies do not need paralegals. Paralegals are still actually relevant, are still important because it's true actually they are not going to do so much legally qualified work, but they are still going to do tasks that we need for legal professionals and to provide what is being asked from us. So, training contract, definitely a very good idea. And if possible, and if that doesn't work, then a paralegal or a legal assistant position also gives you that exposure and experience, actually, that starting ground that you need actually then to continue.
My advice to people was get into AI regulation because that's an area of personal interest to me and something where I want to be more involved. And it's an area where we will need a lot of lawyers and people with an understanding of the law, because obviously to put regulation in place, it's not just a case of keen generalists like me or people with a tech background. It's also a case of people who understand law and are able to put that kind of regulation and actually, make it legal and binding. So that I'm not the person to probably listen to. I'd listen to Kelly, not me. But I think that's an area that I think we're going to see huge expansion because everywhere is now kind of playing catch up to how do they regulate AI? Yeah.
Well, the steps or actually the suggestions that I gave before, I think are applicable to all areas of law. Well, unless you want to be a barrister, because that's actually a completely different route. But then it depends actually what area of law you decide to do. I mean, I think you mentioned actually AI regulation, which actually is a good one, but I think also cybersecurity is also...
That was another one. I think cybersecurity, AI regulation, which was one I sort of put in. And the other one that I saw...
Privacy,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Privacy definitely is another one. And it's related to AI. And because once again, the software, the AI is gathering so much information from us. And right now, personal information is hugely protected. everywhere. Regulation actually is even advancing, changing, being amended so that actually the protection is higher and higher. So that high protection, how is that going to be combined with the fact actually that our information is being saved from everywhere that we are using, from our conversations, from the devices that are listening to conversations. So that is definitely an area actually that is definitely increasing. And in privacy, for example, I'm not a privacy expert, but I have dealt with that. The teams actually, if anything, are starting to get divided. So there are legal professionals, fully qualified lawyers, but there are also privacy professionals who actually do all of these parameters, how the information is being saved, how the information is going to be then stored by different companies and by different users. So it's a very interesting area actually to start thinking about.
I'm going to finish with a kind of personal question. And I think the answer, having, spent the last sort of 15, 20 minutes talking to you, is that you certainly have thought about and have a level of understanding of kind of how artificial intelligence can work with your sector, and you've maybe thought about it more than some other people I've spoken to. But what are you currently doing to keep on top of developments? And as a last kind of piece of advice to colleagues across the sector, is there anything that you would recommend that people start doing in order to stay relevant, or in order to stay on top of this, in order to make sure that they don't fall behind?
Well, unfortunately, actually, there is very little time to get updated or to be on top of what's going to happen. With my job right now, and also with personal circumstances, is actually quite difficult. I will be surprised actually if any lawyer solicitor says, oh yes, I am on top of all the regulations. I am on top of everything that's happening. Because normally actually the way that I have done that, or I still do that, is actually I join seminars or I join law society events actually with new updates which are happening in my sector and actually in the general sector. So probably that's a good way of doing it. But if someone actually has enough time after work to do that, then definitely actually it's a good way to keep on top of the situation.
Well, thank you, Kelly. That's been really, really interesting. It's added, I think, so much to have somebody as a guest from the sector on the show. I really enjoyed having you on. Really pleased as well that there's some kind of optimism and positivity in there, because I'm quite often the doomer on here, but I come away from this with some degree of optimism about the future. So that's it for most people. If you work in the law sector, do stay on after the song that we will play you out with. I've got a kind of little bonus, something that literally in the last few hours that I came across with a load of quite specific apps and stuff for the industry. So if you're in the industry, carry on. If not, then we will end the show for you as we usually do with our AI generator track. Today's is called The AI Divide. Look forward to seeing you all next week. We will be back with an episode on the hospitality industry. But until then, take care. Goodbye.
In the realm of legal minds, a new era ensues. Artificial intelligence, the power it imbues. The judges, solicitors, partners, and all, unaffected by the rising AI call.
Well, thank you for staying on. If you're listening, I presume you work in the law sector. I actually, in the last few hours, came across an article that was actually it was a foreign language article which I've translated with ChatGPT back into English, and it listed a load of specific AI apps from the legal sector. So I thought this would be of interest to people from the sector. So I'm just going to go through the summary that I've got and read those out. And then if anyone's interested, maybe you can look into these apps specifically. So the first one is called Harvey, which is a platform that incorporates an NLM layer, a data lake, and a mediation layer to accurately answer legal questions. It offers a Q&A service for uploading documents and receiving precise legal advice, and is useful in legal research, contracts, and document analysis. The second one is called Even Up, with a capital U, automates the creation of demand letters for personal injury cases, significantly improving speed, quality, and cost. The third one is called Ironclad, a contract life cycle management platform that uses AI to draft contracts, monitor execution, ensure compliance, and manage the contract renewal process. Launched GPT-4 based AI assist to help interpret terms, flag issues, and suggest amendments. The next one is called Robin AI, utilizes generative AI for contract drafting, review, and inquiry, aiming to replace traditional CLM with more efficient and modular products, and it offers a co-pilot platform, with managed services being its largest revenue source. Lexis Plus AI enhances legal research with conversational search capabilities, allowing for drafting, summarization, and detailed analysis. Eve, EVE, a generative AI-driven platform designed to assist with document review, case analysis, client acquisition, legal research, specifically catering to law firm clients. Responsive, without an E on the end, aims to be a generative AI-driven co-pilot for in-house legal teams, assisting with legal know-how and automation tasks like clause drafting and policy creation. Noetica, spelled Noetica, focuses on corporate debt space, reducing term review times and aiding in restructuring terms that serve clients' interests using AI-powered analysis. And finally, Pinsights, Pincites, a contract review startup that offers a Microsoft add-on product leveraging large language models and proprietary playbooks for contract reviews, focusing on standardized terms and improving contract comprehension. So I think these tools demonstrate, the versatility of AI in the legal sector. And maybe for some of you, there's something of interest there that you can do a bit more research into. Thanks for listening. Take care. Goodbye.